Hey everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Spacebar. This is episode 14, How to Improve Your Rehearsals. Behind the Spacebar is a podcast for playback techs, musicians, music directors, really anyone performing on stage with Ableton Live. If this is your first time, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you've returned from listening to previous episodes, then thanks for coming back. I'm super excited. Today, we're not talking about tracks. Today, we'll talk a little bit, I guess, about tracks. I have a couple tips and tricks in here. But I want to talk about something that will improve the sound of your band. Tracks is something that will improve the sound of your band. Playing to a click or with a click will improve the sound of your band. But I want to talk about something that will improve the sound of your performance, that will make everyone feel better with performing on stage. If you're doing this in a church context as a worship leader, this will give you more freedom on stage. You'll feel like you could focus on leading worship. And that is having a better rehearsal. So today I just want to share kind of rapid fire some tips and tricks that I have that will improve your rehearsal. And this applies whether you're a garage band, whether you're a band that's going to go do pre-production before you head out on tour, or if you're a worship leader that does this every single week, week in and week out. I think these tips are going to help. I would love to hear in the comments though, share one tip. Just let me know one tip that has improved your rehearsals, something you've implemented that's improved rehearsals with your band, with your worship team, whatever it is, however you're doing it. So let's dive in. Again, my goal is to not try to harp on a lot of these, but just give you some rapid fire things that I think will really help. Number one, define rehearsal. Rehearsal is not practice. This is the biggest thing I've seen, particularly when I'm working with churches, organizations that have a lot of different people involved, a lot of different people. It's not just because they're volunteers, but just a large group of people, varying degrees of ability and skill. Is a lot of times when we say rehearsal, what we're really talking about is practice, or a lot of us treat rehearsal as practice. What I mean by that is practice is when you learn your parts, rehearse is when you bring them all together. Practice is personal, rehearsal is corporate. What I mean by that is practice is where I grab my iPhone, I listen to the song, I go and just like figure out my section to this. I rehearse my guitar part. I learn the solo. I learn the chord changes for this. Rehearsals when I come together with the whole band to add all my parts together. So big mistake I always see people make is they treat rehearsal as practice. The absolute worst thing you can do, but this is going to get me into step 2, is to show up to rehearsal and go, great, we're going to do a new song. Let's try this. Now, I see a lot of worship leaders do that, but I definitely see bands that I've been in that are just kind of more informal, hang out, let's like play some music, let's have a good time kind of thing. That tends to be a scenario where it's like, let's show up and let's learn it. Step 2, I would encourage you is get everyone content beforehand. Let's say we're in a band, we rehearse in my garage. We're literally a garage band in all sense of the word, of the term. Typically it's like we're hanging out, having a good time. I get that. It's fun. You're with your buddies. But instead of showing up and learning a song, go, hey, what do you guys think about learning this song? We've got a show coming up in a couple weeks. Get people the MP3. If it's a brand new song that you've written, get them the demo of it. I always say, like, let's talk about the least common denominator here. You're a songwriter. You're the front person of the band. You just wrote a song. Literally grab your iPhone and record a demo. You know, if you can't be bothered to set a mic up and plug into Ableton Live into your interface, use Ableton Live, that's fine. Least common denominator, just give me a version of the song to hear beforehand. Maybe give me some thoughts on, oh, it'd be cool to have a guitar solo here to do this, that sort of thing. But get people content beforehand so that, again, respecting what we said at first, we don't turn rehearsal into practice. Let's keep practice personal. Let's learn our parts. Let's bring everything together for rehearsal as a corporate thing altogether. Okay. Number 3, use rehearsal as a way to bring the parts together. We already talked about this. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine this with me. I think of an orchestra. An orchestra would be highly dysfunctional if everyone just came in and played what they wanted to. It would be highly dysfunctional if the individual musicians, individual parts did not learn their part before rehearsal. So use rehearsal as a way to bring the parts together, and use rehearsal as a way to think more about the big picture, to combine all the parts together, to make sure everything sounds good together. It's less of, let me learn the chord progression here. Let me learn, how to solo over this. And it's more of, how does it sound when we all bring it together? Okay. Next thing I have for you, and this is practical and it's tied towards those of us using tracks, which I think is helpful, but add original tracks. And I what I mean by original track, the MP3 you purchase from iTunes, the demo version of the song you have, a recording from your last show of the band doing this song. Add original tracks to your Ableton file so you can hear lyrics, you can hear parts, you can reference it. I see this a lot. Almost every episode I say, let me pick on worship leaders for a moment. I see this often in the church world where people will show up to rehearsal. They'll treat rehearsal like practice and they'll go, okay, let's listen to this new song. And what do? They hold their phone up to their mic and they literally play the song from their iPhone through the mic. In no sense, form, fashion, in any universe, in any multiverse, is that an acceptable way to learn a song? I mean, I guess you could do it if you're in a pinch and you're in a bind, but one, go back to what we said before, send that song out to everyone beforehand. But, two, if you want to reference it during rehearsal, add it to your Ableton session, sync it to your click alongside your stem. So if you need to reference it, you can just unmute it and you can listen to it and it's in everyone's in-ears as opposed to being a doofus and holding your phone up to your mic. Next thing, this is another practical one for those of us using tracks. If you're listening to this podcast, I got to imagine you're probably one of the select few, the chosen few that's using tracks. Keep all your stems in your file so that at any point you could solo out one of those to reference to learn a part. What I teach people is do not download a song. Do not take a song from the studio and go, oh, we've got drums, we've got guitar, we've got bass. We'll never need that. So I'm going to delete all those from my session and just have what I need. We just don't have a keys player. So we're just going to have click and we're going to have synth and we're going to have keys parts. No, have everything. Because you're in rehearsal and the drummer goes, man, what part did I play on that section? You play the original track like we talked about before, which is helpful and beneficial. But then you go, oh, it's hard for me to hear. Is it or is it boom, 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 or whatever? I don't know. I'm not a drummer. I'm making stuff up here. If you have the drum part, you can literally solo that during rehearsal, and hear the exact part, which is super, super helpful. Now let's wrap up the tail end of this. Some tips for rehearsal, for running rehearsal that I found to be effective and beneficial. Number one, have some sort of structure. Have some sort of timeline to your rehearsal. This is super important. I'm going to share a very practical tip here in a second. But I realized as I was preparing for this episode that particular tip doesn't apply to every scenario. I was thinking of some buddies of mine that just went through pre-production for the tour they're about to go on. And they rehearsed for 2 or 3 days in Nashville before they hit the road. Thinking of my buddy David, who's about to head out on a tour, I think in April, end of April, and they're going to head into pre-production. Have some sort of structure, some sort of timeline so that people see the end in mind, right? If you're doing 3 days of rehearsal, just 3 days of monotonous running on and on and on of rehearsal isn't going to help, isn't going to work. But, send a schedule out to everyone. Now, if you've got a tour manager, production manager, they're probably going to do this. But again, I don't know what scale, what stage, where you are in this timeline, whether you're the person in charge, you're production person, you're playback person, you're the worship leader, whatever you are, whatever role you are. If you have a part in that and you can help with it, then yeah, make it easy for everyone and send out some sort of structure and go, okay, today we're going to run each individual song. And then we're going to bring all the parts together, and then we'll rehearse the set and we'll work on our transitions. I didn't plan on doing this, but even as I say that, it reminds me of, in that context, in longer rehearsals I've had, this has been something that's been really beneficial, is split that up into those different segments. So day one, particularly when I'm talking about running tracks, doesn't have to be day one, but the first part of the rehearsal is we're going to work on individual songs. We're not talking about transitions. We're not talking about set lists. We're working on individual songs. We run a song, we open an Ableton set. How's it sound? How the pieces come together? Good. Again, depending on the scale, the scope of things you're at, if you're working with professional musicians that do this full time, there's going to be very few songs that you really have to teach someone their part or clarify a part, but it's an opportunity to do something unique. I love watching the Super Bowl, watching Grammys, watching performances where someone takes a song that we've heard a million times before and they do a new version of it, a new take on it, a new spin on it where, it was acoustic, now it's electronic. It was electronic, now it's acoustic. Take that day, that first third of your rehearsal, however you're splitting up, whether it's a day or it's across 3 days, take the time to do that. Focus on individual songs, okay? Now, the second half of this, start talking about sets, start talking about transitions. Maybe you're going to do some medleys of songs. Maybe you're going to combine this song and that song, and we'll do a new version of it. We're going to really focus on our transitions. And then finally, the third half of this, kind of combined with the second and third half are kind of together, is we're going to focus on sets. So for me as a playback tech, as someone using Ableton Live, that's then the point where I take my formatted songs and I bring them together in the set. I try really hard when I'm working with artists to split it. Individual song, let's get that right. New versions of songs, great, let's get that right. Then let's start talking about possible transitions, medleys of things, and then let's practice individual sets. You know, everyone I've ever worked with, traveled with, built Ableton content for, consulted with, has a standard set and then some variations. Use that third half of your tour, of your rehearsal, your pre-production time to figure that out. Okay. But again, going back to what I said before this, that led me into this tangent, is have some sort of structure, share the vision of this so that people know where you're going and what you're working on. Now let's say something that's going to feel like I'm competing against this, but it's a different context. If you are just meeting together with your band and you've got a show in a couple weeks and you're rehearsing and getting ready, if you're a worship leader doing this week in and week out every single time, no more than an hour. That's what I found is kind of the breaking point for rehearsals. I know some people that get together and they have like 3 to 4 hour marathon rehearsals. If it's fun and it's working for you, great. But what I typically find in those situations is it's working for the one person that's unprepared or the few people that are unprepared. And man, the people that were prepared and have done their part are pretty pissed off. Maybe I shouldn't say pissed off. They're pretty irritated. They're like, you're wasting my time, and you're turning, typically when rehearsals go over an hour, it's not because you like really love hanging out and these are your friends. It's because you're turning rehearsal into practice. Go back to step number 1, what we talked about there at the beginning. So I think if you treat rehearsal as rehearsal typically, again, I'm trying to like make a blanket statement that's stereotypical, but I think typically it should not be more than an hour. If it's more than an hour, you're being inefficient. You're not giving people material beforehand. You're treating rehearsal as if it's practice. Generally speaking, I find that to be the case. If you're preparing for a show, then don't schedule a 4-hour rehearsal. I found it's better to schedule 4 1-hour rehearsals. Focus on a few songs, rehearsal 3, what's fancy new stuff we can do. Rehearsal 4, we practice the set a few times. Or rehearsal 3, we like put a bow on a few things. We rehearse our set. Rehearsal 4, we rehearse our set. We show up for our show in 2 weeks and we're good to go. Tips to make your rehearsal be less than an hour. Keep it moving. Don't stay too long on the same topic. Much like me doing a podcast, harping on a particular thing, getting stuck on it. If you're struggling with the section, move on. If it's an individual person that's struggling, don't be afraid. Like I say, call them out. Don't be a jerk about it, but just go, hey, Tom, it feels like that part, just work on that a little bit better. Or, hey, John Boy and Billy, you guys work on your guitar parts better so that they sync up a little better, whatever it is. Don't spend too much time on one part, because that's what starts to make rehearsals drag, is when you run it and you run it and you run it and you run it. On the flip side of that, though, don't move past it unless you have it. I always tell people this: don't let the first time you step on stage and perform live be the first time you played through the song completely, like, correctly. I had a scenario. I was in Florida, was playing in this church context, in this particular ministry, and we kept struggling with this one song. And there was lack of clarity as to whether we went to the 6 or we went to the 1, or we went to a 1 or we went to 1/3, who did what, where we did what, our structure was. And we struggled to get through that in rehearsal. But guess what we did? We left rehearsal. We never clarified, and we went into the performance, and we were all just kind of looking at each other like, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know where we're going to go. We made the best of it. But I always tell people, don't let the first time you step on stage, don't let when you step on stage be the first time you've actually played that song in entirety correctly. Okay. Final thing I want to say here is, if you have to, cut a song if you need to. If you're looking at rehearsal for a show in 2 weeks and you're working on running all your songs, and you get to a particular song that you're struggling with, it's just not working, it's just not clicking, then you know what? Move past it. That's perfectly fine. Just go, okay, we need a little more time. We don't have that time. This is something that I struggle with, knowing my limits. I always joke that I'm a high achiever, but I'm really lazy. So I have like big dreams, but then I'm too lazy to do them. So I just live in a constant state of disappointment is my joke, which is slightly true. I'm a happy man, I have a great life, but like, don't set these grand visions of we're going to play this amazing hour-long rock opera that's a medley of all of our songs and blah, 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 blah. If it ain't working and you have a show in 2 weeks, don't kill yourself unless like this is your showcase. This is your chance to make it big, to quit the job at the Kmart and move out of the basement. Unless it's like your big moment, then just go, we bit off more than we could chew. As my dad used to say, growing up in North Carolina, your eyes were bigger than your belly hole, which means you ordered more food than you could eat. That's a weird saying, but I think it makes sense. I think you get it. But think about it. If you've tried to go too big, scale it down and just go, we're going to cut this song. We're not going to do it this week. We'll come back to another week. Now, if you're listening to this as someone who's using tracks, wants to use tracks, you want a little bit of extra help in that process. Here's a great tip I have for you. Head to FromStudioToStage.com/free. I've got hundreds of dollars worth of free resources that you can download for free just by sharing your name and email. Everything from click tracks to a tracks template to guide cue files to timecode files to control and trigger automation elements. So if you're listening to this, and I imagine you are, if you're listening to a podcast called Behind the Spacebar, if you're listening to this as someone interested in Ableton, then head to FromStudioToStage.com/free. Check out those free resources. And if you enjoyed this content, I release a new episode every single Monday, but even better than that, I release a new podcast and or tutorial every single day, 10 a.m. Central here on YouTube. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, click the link to head over to YouTube and do me a favor, two things that are going to help and benefit you. Hit subscribe, and then 2, hit the bell icon so you're notified whenever I post new content. You can join in on the premiere, chat with people, like-minded people watching it all over the world. And 2, you're notified when the piece of content comes out. If you like it, you can click through and watch it. If you don't like it, then you can move on to the next one. But with that, I will see you all next week. Thanks so much for joining me and hanging out. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Have a great week, and bye.